Welcome back, night wanderers, to Nakora Nights. Tonight, we enter the one place even locals refuse to name after dark, the Appalachian Mountains, where the woods don't just grow, they breathe. For centuries, travelers whispered about the mountain witches, women who vanished into the forest and came back, changed. Eyes black as ash, voices that could mimic anyone you love, and chants that call the dead to dance beneath the trees. These aren't myths. These are 10 true stories, pulled from ranger reports, missing person cases, and local confessions too terrifying to repeat aloud. You'll hear about the hunter who followed laughter into the woods, the family who found handprints on their ceiling, and the hiker who saw a woman standing in the river, facing upstream, whispering his name. So before we begin, turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and remember, if you ever hear someone singing in the Appalachians, don't answer. If you're brave enough to step inside this darkness, like, subscribe, and comment below, I heard her songs. If you survive till the end, now take a deep breath. The forest is listening. Let's begin the 10 untold most disturbing true Appalachia witch horror stories. I thought I went into those mountains to forget what I'd lost, but they remembered me before I ever stepped inside. Now, sometimes at night, I still hear my name whispered from the trees. My name's Evan Cole, and I used to fix broken computers for a living. Remote support, 12-hour shifts, glowing screens, and the soft hum of a fan that never turned off. I was one of those people who solved problems I couldn't see, listening to strangers breathe over phone lines while their machines fell apart. My life ran on coffee and silence. Nothing changed, and after a while, everything just felt gray. Last spring, after another endless night of blinking error codes, I decided to step away from the noise. No more tickets, no more calls, no more messages from people who didn't know my face. I needed to breathe, to disappear somewhere that didn't hum with electricity. I looked at a map and found a small mark near the edge of the Appalachian foothills, a place called Cold Ash Valley. The name alone caught me. It wasn't a popular hiking trail, barely a dot on the ranger maps, but the reviews said it was quiet, untouched, a place where you could hear your own heartbeat again. That sounded like heaven. I told my sister I'd be gone 5 days. I packed everything the way I always did, clean, careful, logical. Compass, GPS, flares, printed maps, a knife, tent, dried food, a small camera, and my old watch. It was supposed to be simple. Walk, rest, listen. The first 2 days were peaceful, like stepping into another lifetime. The wind moved through the trees like breath, the creeks sang under rocks, and the nights felt endless but kind. I'd sit by the small fire, listening to owls echo through the dark, and for the first time in years, I wasn't tired of being alive. But on the third morning, something shifted. I'd planned to cut east toward a marked ridge, but my paper map showed a thin dotted line running through a hollow that wasn't on my GPS. It looked shorter, a small pass between the hills, leading right toward a creek bed that would save me time. Curiosity got the better of me. I'd been hiking long enough to trust my sense of direction. About an hour in, I saw a crooked black tree with something nailed to it. An old wooden marker, gray and split by the weather. No letters, just a long scar beneath it, like something sharp had carved 5 perfect lines into the bark. Too clean for animal claws. I took a photo, smiled at my own nerves, and kept walking. The air changed a little after that. The sound of birds faded first. Then the bugs. I realized I couldn't hear my footsteps the same way anymore. Every noise I made seemed swallowed up, like the woods were pulling the sound down into the soil. Then came the smell. Damp, earthy, and something else. A faint tang like rusted iron. I told myself I was just spooking myself, that isolation does weird things to the mind. But then, through the trees, I saw a shape. A house. More like a shack, really, leaning against a slope, half-eaten by vines in time. The roof sagged, and the porch looked ready to collapse. There was no trail leading to it, no sign anyone had lived there in decades. I should have turned around. But my curiosity, or maybe something else, pushed me closer. The porch groaned under my boots. The front door was cracked just enough to let out a draft of cold air that smelled like stone and damp cloth. Not just cool air, cold, like stepping into a cellar. I pushed the door open. Inside, the light barely reached. Dust floated in the air like fog. Cobwebs clung to everything. A small table sat in the center, half covered in papers and glass jars filled with dried herbs, blackened from age. The writing on the pages was faint, scratched in shaky, uneven letters. The same sentence repeated over and over. It watches from the trees. It waits when you sleep. I froze. The floor creaked behind me. I turned fast, flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing, just the open door and that faint smell of rust again. The air felt thick, heavy. I could almost feel someone breathing behind my neck. I backed out of the house slowly, heart thudding so loud it hurt. When I reached the spot where I'd dropped my pack, it was gone. No drag marks, no footprints. Just a clean patch of dirt where it had been. I spun in a slow circle. Every tree looked the same. The trail I'd come from, gone. I tried my phone, dead. Not no service, dead. Wouldn't even turn on. My compass needle spun in lazy circles, like it didn't care where north was. My watch had stopped at 4:23 p.m. That's when the panic hit. The kind that crawls up your spine and squeezes your throat shut. I picked a direction, any direction, and started walking. Branches clawed at my sleeves, roots tripped me. The woods felt wrong, like they were shifting while I moved, rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing. The light was dying, shadows long and trembling. I pitched my tent fast, hands shaking. No fire. No food. Just the tent and my knife. I tried to stay awake, but at some point, exhaustion won. I woke up to footsteps. Soft, slow, circling the tent. I held my breath. Listened. A wet breath followed, rough and gurgling like someone breathing through water. It moved closer. I could feel the weight of it pressing into the ground. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it would tear through. Then silence. I waited until dawn before daring to move. When I finally opened the tent, sunlight spilled through the trees. The forest looked alive again. Birds singing, insects buzzing, the smell of pine. And there, right outside my tent, sat my pack. Clean, untouched. Like it had never gone missing. I didn't question it. I packed fast, faster than I ever had, and walked. Didn't check my map, didn't look back. Just moved. Hours later, I saw a weathered sign, Cold Ash Ranger Station, 2 miles. When I stumbled in, the young ranger behind the desk barely looked up, asked if I was okay if I'd gotten turned around. I said I had, tried to laugh it off. Then an older ranger stepped out from the back. White beard, ball cap, eyes that looked tired in a way you don't get from lack of sleep. "You take the hollow path?" he asked. My stomach dropped. He didn't wait for an answer. "Don't go back there. That trail, it comes and goes. Some maps show it, some don't. Locals say it leads to the hollow church, the one where the midwife's prayers still echo at night." I must have looked confused, because he sighed and told me what little he knew. Long ago, before the town had a name, there was a woman who healed people with herbs. Folks called her Old Marah. She sold teas that cured pain, but after you drank them, you'd start hearing your name whispered from the woods. One night, a man followed the whisper and never came back. They blamed her, said she sold her soul to the mountain spirits. The town burned her shack, buried the ashes under the churchyard. Years later, the church itself was abandoned. People said if you walked too deep into the woods, you could still hear her prayers, a hollow, echoing chant in a dead woman's voice. The ranger told me others had gone missing on that path. Those who came back told the same story. A house that wasn't there before, strange noises, time stopping. I left that station and drove until the mountains disappeared in my rear view, but it didn't end there. Weeks later, back home, I started hearing soft scratching at night, like fingernails against the drywall. Then whispers, so faint I thought it was my mind, until it said my name. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that house again. the jars on the table, the papers, and through the window, a shadow standing just beyond the trees. I tried burning sage, salt lines, all that superstition stuff people swear by online. It didn't stop. A month after that, I woke to a smell I'll never forget, damp earth and iron. I followed it to the backyard. There, beneath the old oak tree, the dirt was disturbed, freshly turned. I dug, and I found a jar. Inside were ashes and strands of dark hair. Taped to the lid was a name written in faded ink, mine. I buried it deeper that night, but I swear sometimes I can still hear it rattling under the soil, like something's waiting to be let out. Now, when I can't sleep, I hear her. Not outside, inside, a voice whispering in the dark. It watches from the trees. It waits when you sleep. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I can smell her herbs, sweet and bitter all at once, drifting in through the cracks in my window. I think she's still out there, waiting, and I think the mountain remembers me too. If you've made it this far, I need to know something. Have you ever heard your name whispered when you were completely alone? Because if you have, you might have already met her, and she never forgets the ones who disturb her hollow. My name is Ward, and I've lived most of my life behind glowing screens and half-empty coffee cups. I build websites for a living, which means I build tiny worlds that don't exist, while mine slowly falls apart around me. 2 years ago, my 7-year relationship ended in a crash so quiet it almost sounded kind. She left with a note that said, "You fade too easily." For months, I just sat in that small apartment in Henderson, North Carolina, watching dust float in the light from my monitor. Then one night, after my 4th cup of burnt coffee and a few too many memories, I decided to disappear somewhere that Wi-Fi couldn't follow. I bought a cheap tent, packed instant meals, and pointed my old truck toward the Appalachian backcountry. I told myself it wasn't running away. I told myself it was healing. Lies can sound like comfort if you whisper them slow enough. The ranger station sat at the edge of the woods, the kind of place that looked older than the people inside it. I was flipping through trail maps when a ranger, older man, gray stubble, eyes like dull iron, leaned over my shoulder and tapped a blank spot on the map. "You want quiet?" he asked, voice flat. "Try Hollow Ridge. Folks used to go there. Ain't on the new maps, not since the 90s. Girl went missing. Parents never stopped looking." He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached the eyes. His gaze held something else, a warning maybe, or guilt. I should have picked another trail, but grief makes you reckless. The next morning, I hiked in early. The sun was pale and tired, light catching on dew like tiny mirrors. After 3 miles, I left the main path and cut toward the ridge. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Not peaceful quiet, more like the air was holding its breath. The forest felt untouched. Trees so old their bark looked fossilized, roots coiling over stones like mussels. No old campsites, no footprints, just me and the sound of my boots crunching soil. My compass started twitching before noon, spinning like it couldn't decide what was north. My GPS glitched, freezing on the same coordinates. It should have felt freeing. Instead, it felt watched. By the second night, I'd built a small camp near a creek that whispered through the rocks. I filtered water, made terrible coffee, and told myself this was good. I even wrote a few lines in a waterproof notebook. Maybe I can live here. I was lying, of course. But writing made the silence feel smaller. Then came the third night. It started with a crack, loud, deliberate. Someone stepping on a branch just beyond the firelight. Then another, closer. The rhythm of footsteps, slow and measured, circling. Every instinct I had told me it wasn't an animal. You can hear the difference. Animals move with hesitation. This thing didn't. "Hello?" I called, stupidly. "Just camping here." Nothing answered. I lifted my flashlight. For a second, I thought I caught a figure. Tall, too tall, too tall. Limbs long, almost stretched like they didn't belong on a human frame. The light caught pale skin, or maybe just the idea of it. Then it vanished behind a tree. I stumbled into my tent and zipped it shut, holding my knife like it was worth anything. The woods outside whispered, small movements that made the nylon walls tremble. But no attack came, only that quiet, endless watching. Morning came gray and heavy. I packed in minutes, desperate to leave. But the trail was gone. Where there had been markers, there was now only forest. The creek had vanished. My GPS was blank, compass still spinning. Then the whisper started. At first, I thought it was the wind, curling through branches, but it carried shape, rhythm, tone. Like a voice pretending to be wind but missing the melody. Then I heard my name. Eli. My blood turned to ice. I spun in every direction. Nothing. It came again, closer this time, threaded through the trees. Eli, come back. I ran. Didn't care where, just ran. Branches tore my arms, my legs. Roots grabbed at my boots. The forest seemed to twist as I moved, like it didn't want me to leave. That night, I didn't sleep. I built a massive fire and sat with my back to a rock wall, my knife still shaking in my hand. Every so often, I'd hear whispering, now multiple voices, soft, almost singing, then humming. It sounded like an old lullaby sung wrong. When I turned, I saw faces. White, featureless faces hovering just past the firelight, blinking in and out of sight like candle smoke. I bolted. I don't remember making the choice. 1 second I was frozen. The next I was crashing through brush, leaving everything behind. The tent, my bag, even my light. The mountain pulled me downhill, mud sliding under my feet. My ankle twisted, pain flaring bright, but I didn't stop. The whispers followed, echoing from every direction, and then I saw it. A clearing, too clean, too still, like a painting. And, at its center, a cabin. No path led to it, yet smoke coiled gently from the chimney. I don't know why I went closer. Maybe I thought someone could help, or maybe something in me already knew I wouldn't find anyone else. The door creaked open before I touched it. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, except for one clear chair. An old woman sat there, her skin pale, her hair thin as cobwebs, but her eyes sharp and bright like whetstones. "You saw him," she said, not a question. I froze. "You heard him too." Her voice was calm, but her mouth trembled like it was remembering. "Who?" I whispered. "The Hollow Man," she said, her tone almost fond. "He walks between breaths. You weren't supposed to see him. That's how he moves, forgotten." I tried to back away, but my body wouldn't respond. Her smile cracked wider, far too wide. Then she spoke again, voice changing, layered, almost singing backward, and the world folded. When I woke, I was lying face down on gravel outside the ranger station. My clothes were torn, my hands bloody, my tongue dry as sand. They said they found me wandering the access road at dawn, mumbling about the woods. No one found my tent, my gear, not even my notebook. The ranger who'd marked the map said he didn't remember me. A week later, I moved to Tucson, Arizona. No trees, no shade, no shade. My apartment's always bright, but sometimes, just before sleep, I hear it, a soft scraping behind the walls, like someone dragging their nails across wood. And if I close my eyes, I swear I hear a woman humming near the air vent, the tune shifting, like she's trying to remember the right words. That would have been the end of it, but a month ago I found something strange. A message slipped under my door, written in salt. 3 lines. "Don't forget the windowsills. Don't sleep through sunset. He remembers who looked." Now, when dusk comes, I pour salt along the sills like my grandmother used to, the way she did every night before she died. I never understood why until I heard the scratching start inside my walls when I stopped. Sometimes, I hear the rocking chair in the next room move on its own. It creaks in rhythm, slow, steady, like someone waiting. Once, I sat in it. Just once. And for a heartbeat, I saw faces flicker across the window. Faces I didn't recognize, but they looked at me with eyes full of blame, whispering through the glass. Now, I don't sit there anymore. I just listen. And I think about the woman by the creek, the the one people whisper about in these hills. They say she hums as she washes something red from her hands. But no matter how long she scrubs, it never comes off. Sometimes, when the wind passes just right through the cracks in the wall, I can almost hear her voice again, soft and tired, whispering my name. "Eli, come back." And I whisper back without meaning to. I never left. I never believed the mountains could keep secrets, not until they started whispering mine. I thought the woods were quiet because they were empty, but silence can hide things that listen back. My name's Lucas Mayer, and back then I worked nights cleaning the county middle school in a small town called Coldwater Ridge. It wasn't much of a life, but it was steady, and the pay was enough to keep my trailer warm and my old truck running. Nights were long, floors were quiet, and I liked being the only one walking those dim hallways when the clock hit 2:17 a.m. I used to hum to keep myself company. Sometimes the sound echoed so oddly I swore another voice was humming back. Every fall, I'd take a week off and disappear into the smoky foothills with my cousin Mark. It was our thing since high school, our way of keeping sane. Just two guys, the woods, and a fire. Mark always said the mountains made him feel small in a good way, said they were older than anything we could ruin. That October, he went up a day before me, like always. He sent me a photo when he reached the trailhead, truck parked beside an old ranger sign, half buried in weeds, the wood blackened by time. I texted back, "Don't drink all the whiskey before I get there." He sent a laughing emoji. That was the last thing I ever got from him. When I drove up the next night, mist clung low over the road, curling around the tires like smoke. His truck was still idling by the sign, driver's door open, keys swinging from the ignition, engine humming. That sound, it didn't feel like noise, it felt like breathing. I called out his name, but the trees swallowed my voice. Inside the truck, his phone lay dead on the seat, his pack in the back untouched. Nothing broken. Nothing stolen. Just stopped. I should have called the sheriff right then, but I told myself maybe he'd hiked in early, maybe he wanted to set up camp before dark. I turned off the truck and started down the trail with my gear, the light fading fast. The air felt wrong heavy, like the forest was listening. I'd walked that path 100 times, but it was different that night. Some turns came too soon, others stretched longer. The rocks under my boots didn't sit right. The forest had shifted, or maybe I had. When I reached the clearing, the tent was there, half collapsed, the flap torn like someone stood up mid-movement. His coat was draped over a fallen log, boots lying neatly beside it. The fire pit was cold, untouched. "Mark?" I yelled. My voice cracked like I hadn't spoken in years. No answer, just wind. I searched the brush until my flashlight trembled in my hand. No footprints, no scent of smoke, not even the smell of him. Just absence. That's a kind of presence, too. Emptiness so sharp it hums in your teeth. I stayed there till morning, or maybe I never really slept. The noises came in whispers, branches snapping, leaves shifting in rhythm, a faint whistle-like breath under the soil. At one point, I thought I heard my name whispered soft as moss. By sunrise, I stumbled back to my truck and drove straight to the sheriff's office. They sent a search team, dogs, drones, even a chopper. Nothing. Not a scent, not a boot print, not a shred of fabric. They marked it as missing, presumed lost. But Mark wasn't careless. He didn't walk barefoot into dark woods. He didn't leave his boots behind like that. For a week, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the clearing, of his coat on that log like it was waiting for me. So I went back. Alone. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed a flashlight, a knife, and a canteen, and drove till the road turned to dirt. When I stepped onto that trail again, the air felt heavy like fog you can taste. No birds, no crickets, just the slow pulse of wind through pine needles. Halfway in, I started smelling something burnt. Not wood, herbs, like sage and rosemary charred till they turned sweet. The same scent my grandma used to tell stories about, the smoke woman. Said a healer in the 1970s burned her cabin down trying to cure a fever that wasn't human. Said her smoke still walked the holler, searching for lungs to fill. I followed that smell. It pulled me deeper off trail until I found something that shouldn't have been there. A wooden post, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, nails hammered into every tree in a perfect circle around it. Big rusty nails, heads bent from time. I counted 12 before I stopped. My flashlight hit something small at the base of one trunk. Clay, cracked and gray, shaped like a little doll. Human-like, with real teeth pressed into its grin. The sight made my stomach drop. Someone had buried it once. The dirt still clung to its face. When I lifted it, I swear I heard a breath behind me. A child's laugh. The woods went colder. My ears rang. I dropped the doll, but the sound followed me, a whisper just behind my shoulder. I ran until I hit the clearing again, gasping. The tent was gone. Not collapsed. Gone. The ground where it stood was smooth, like someone scraped the memory of it away. Then I heard it. "Hey, over here." It was my voice. Not close, but not far. It came from the deeper woods, the old section folks called Widow's Bend, where the forest floor sinks soft with rot. I stood frozen, knowing what I should do, turn around, leave, but my legs moved anyway. My flashlight flickered once, then again, like something was breathing over my shoulder. The forest pressed tighter the further I went. Branches snagged my jacket. The air stank of wet soil and smoke. I stepped through a curtain of hanging moss and into a clearing I'd never seen. At its center stood a round cabin made from dark logs, sealed with something black and sticky. The wood shimmered like tar, like it was sweating. Symbols carved into every beam, circles, spirals, marks that looked like eyes. Bones nailed to the walls, deer skulls, jawbones, and one human hand I prayed was fake. The door stood open. Inside, it was darker than the night outside. Cold, like something living had left, but its breath hadn't. There was someone in there, standing still, barefoot on the wood floor, shirtless. Same height as Mark, same hair, same shape of shoulders. "Mark?" He turned. It was his face, but wrong. Eyes too still. Mouth stretched too wide when it smiled. The skin around his lips cracked when he spoke. "You came back," it said, but the voice was mine. Every hair on my body lifted. I stepped back. It stepped forward, feet creaking against the boards. That's when I saw the carvings, symbols cut into its chest and arms, filled with black resin like the stuff on the walls. The air pulsed around him, thick with the smell of burnt sage. I ran. Didn't think, didn't breathe. Just ran till branches cut my face and my flashlight died. I could still hear it behind me, calling with my voice. When I broke through the last trees, the trailhead was there. Mark's truck idling, key swinging. The clock on the dash still read 7:45 p.m., the exact time I'd arrived the night before. I didn't look back. I drove till dawn, painted the highway pale gray. I quit my job the next day and left Coldwater Ridge, moved in with my brother near Nashville. Told him I needed a new start, but the dreams followed. Every few nights, I see that cabin again, hear my voice calling from the dark. Sometimes it's Mark's voice, sometimes my mother's. Sometimes it's both. Always ends the same way. The thing walks toward me, smiling too wide. Last week, I got a package in the mail, no return address. No postmark. Inside was half a deer antler, freshly broken, edges wet. I called the post office. They said it never passed through them. Said my box hadn't been opened. That night, I smelled burned herbs outside my window. Then I heard it again, my voice whispering, just one word, "Come back." I thought I was losing it. Until my neighbor knocked the next morning, pale as paper. She said she'd seen someone in the yard during the night. A man, barefoot, staring at my window. That was 3 days ago. Now I'm driving back toward Coldwater Ridge, toward Widow's Bend. I don't think I'm going to survive this, but I need to see what's left of that cabin, maybe burn it, maybe end it. There's something the sheriff never found, something buried under that clearing. See, I went through some old county records before I left. Back in 1972, a fire wiped out a healer's shack in that same hollow. Locals said she'd been teaching the old ways, using smoke and bone to cure things that shouldn't exist. When they found the ruins, the air still smelled like herbs burning. The only thing left standing was a circle of trees, each nailed shut with rusty iron. They said she was trying to keep something inside. Now I think she failed. I've packed one bag, flashlight, knife, gas can. No more running. I'll follow the old road past the ridge, into the hollow. If you find this recording, if you're hearing my voice now, don't go looking for me. Don't follow the smell of smoke or the sound that sounds like your own name. And if you ever dig under your porch and find a doll with real teeth, put it back and leave town before dark. Because some things in these mountains don't just watch. They wait. And sometimes they wait wearing your face. My name's Caleb Rourke, and back then I worked in a coal repair yard outside of Charleston, West Virginia. The kind of place where the air burns your throat and your clothes always smell like smoke, no matter how long you soak them. I'd get up before sunrise, fix busted mining gear till sundown, and try not to think about how my life used to mean something. But this happened years ago, back when I still believed hard work could bury bad luck. Back before I found out that some things in these mountains don't care about what you believe or how strong you think you are. It started with a message from my cousin Luke. We hadn't talked in years, not since my dad's funeral. He was the kind of guy who disappeared for months, came back with a new story about ghosts, witches, or old mountain gods. I figured he was drunk half the time, but his message that night was simple. Got the cabin at Widow's Hollow for the weekend. You in? I didn't think twice. I needed to get away. My hands were cut up from work. My girlfriend had packed her stuff and left 2 weeks earlier, and my rent was late. I wanted to breathe air that didn't taste like rust. Luke picked me up that Friday afternoon in his old rusted Ford. He looked bad, pale, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't eaten in days. His once cocky grin was gone, replaced by a nervous twitch in his jaw. The first thing he did when I climbed in was glance at the rearview mirror and mutter, "Keep your window cracked." The air up there, it listens. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. We drove for hours into the hills, the roads twisting tighter the higher we went. The radio cut out after we passed a faded sign that read Hemlock County Line. The trees leaned in like they wanted to hear what we were saying. By the time we reached the cabin, dusk was settling over the ridge. It wasn't the dump I expected, just a small log place tucked into the tree line, with a rusted lantern hanging by the porch and a wind chime made from old spoons. Luke said his uncle had built it back in the 50s as a hunting place, but no one ever hunted there. The locals called the area Widow's Hollow. We unpacked, ate canned beans, and sat by the fire. For a while it felt normal. Luke even smiled once or twice. But every now and then, his eyes drifted to the window. When I finally asked what was wrong, he said, calm as ever, "If you hear tapping tonight, don't open the door." He said it like he was talking about the weather. That night, around 2:17 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch, slow, dragging steps, heavy enough to make the boards groan. At first, I thought Luke had gone outside to pee, but then I heard breathing. Not the steady rhythm of a person, but a kind of stuttering inhale, like something learning how to mimic the sound. I turned my head toward the kitchen and saw Luke sitting at the table in the dark, not moving, not blinking, just staring at the back window. "You hear it?" I whispered. He nodded. Then came the tapping, 4 knocks. 1 pause, 3 quick ones, like a signal, like it wanted to make sure we were listening. Luke didn't say a word. He just gripped the rifle across his lap and whispered, "Don't move. Don't speak, don't look." The tapping circled the cabin. The boards moaned under weight that was too heavy to be human. I counted the steps, holding my breath. Then silence. I don't remember sleeping. I just remember the gray light of morning bleeding through the curtains, and Luke still sitting there, eyes sunken and bloodshot. After breakfast, he said he needed to show me something. We walked behind the cabin, down into the thick brush where the fog clung low to the ground. That's when I saw them. Prints. bare but wrong. They looked like hands. 5 long fingers pressing deep into the soil, each ending in sharp indents. The steps were spaced apart, like whatever made them walked on all fours, but upright when it wanted to. I asked him what they were. He said, "They've been showing up every time I come here since last fall." "Why do you keep coming back?" I asked. He looked toward the tree line. "Trying to find my uncle. He vanished up here last October." They never found him, just his truck and his gear. I stared at the prints. "What do you think happened?" He swallowed hard. He opened the door. That night, we barricaded the cabin, pushed the dresser against the front door, nailed boards across the windows, even stacked wood along the porch. Luke said it wouldn't matter. At midnight, the tapping came again. First the back wall, then the kitchen window, then the front porch. It circled us, slow and patient, like it was walking through a routine. Then, a voice. Low, rough, like someone trying to copy a sound they'd only half heard. "Luke," it said. "Let me in." Luke's hands trembled on the rifle. His eyes went glassy. The voice moved around the cabin. "Where did you go, Luke?" I couldn't breathe. "Don't answer," I whispered, but he was already crying. Quiet, shaking, whispering something I couldn't catch. Then it laughed. A dry, broken sound that wasn't human. By morning, the prints surrounded the cabin. And we found something else, a small red scarf hanging on the fence post. Torn, old, covered in dried mud. Luke said it used to belong to a woman from town. Folks called her the Red Scarf Woman. She'd been in every old photo taken in Hemlock County for nearly a century. Same face, same scarf, never aging. They said she was the first witch of Widow's Hollow. That night, I dreamed of her. She stood in the doorway, scarf fluttering, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. When I woke up, the fire was out and the room was cold enough to see my breath. On the table sat a candle, black, thick, and dripping. I hadn't lit it. Luke said it wasn't ours. He said, "That's her candle, don't touch it." But the smell, it was awful. Like burning fat. We watched as the flame flickered and bent, whispering sounds that weren't wind. I swear I heard a man's voice muttering through it, like it was talking back. Luke said the old stories claimed the witches made candles from animal tallow to talk with the dead. The locals called it the Black Candle. The air in that cabin grew heavier every hour. I could feel eyes watching from the tree line, see shapes shifting just beyond the fog. Every night, the tapping came back, and every morning, the scarf was closer, tied to the porch, hanging from the window latch, draped across the firewood pile. On the third night, the voice changed. It whispered my name. Caleb. I froze. It sounded like my mother. She'd been dead 10 years. "Let me in, honey." I dropped the mug I was holding. It shattered across the floor. Luke didn't even look at me. He just whispered, "It's learning you." Then he told me the truth. Last fall, he'd come up alone hoping to find their uncle's body. Instead, he found something buried under the old shed. A wooden box filled with bones and hair, bound with twine, and a child's lullaby carved into the lid. The tune was familiar. One of those mountain songs every kid in Hemlock grew up hearing. But the words weren't right. It was the witch's lullaby. He said the children of the Hollow used to sing it in their sleep, claiming they heard it in dreams. The lyrics described the deaths of townsfolk who hadn't died yet, and when they did, the song changed again. Luke thought the box belonged to the witch, said when he touched it, he heard her humming. That night, we burned it in the fire. At 3:11 a.m., the cabin shook. The door rattled on its hinges, and the windows pulsed like something was pressing its face against the glass. The voice screamed this time, not in words, just rage. Luke fired through the door. The echo vanished into silence. When dawn came, the scarf was gone. So was Luke. The rifle lay on the floor, barrel still warm. I searched the woods until I couldn't feel my legs, calling his name until the air itself felt wrong. Thick, humming, charged. Then I saw the prints again, heading toward the ravine. Beside them was something new. A single red thread caught on a branch. I followed it until I reached the edge of the hollow where the fog moved like it was breathing. And there, in the distance, I saw her, the woman with the scarf, standing at the tree line. I didn't go closer. I ran. I never saw Luke again. 2 weeks later, I got a postcard, no return address. Just one line written in red ink. Don't come looking for me. That was 3 years ago. I live in an apartment now, 4th floor, no balcony, no fire escape. But last month, I heard it again. 4 taps. 1 pause. 3 quick ones. Then, a whisper, Caleb. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I watched as the shadow passed behind the curtain, tall, narrow, wrong. When it left, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. And as I write this now, I keep hearing something faint through the wall, a lullaby, sung in a voice that sounds almost human. I think it's learning my name again, and when it does, I'll never open the door. I used to think the forest was quiet because it was peaceful. Now I know silence can mean something's listening. I learned that in Red Hollow, deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the trees remember everything that dies beneath them. My name's Elias Warren. I'm 34, a park ranger, and I used to keep watch over the ridgelines near Wolf Creek. I wasn't always a ranger. Before that, I studied old mountain stories, the kind about witches and wild things folks used to whisper about. I didn't believe any of them. I thought they were just warnings carved into folklore to keep children close to the fire at night. But then I went looking for proof, and I found it. It started after my father passed. He'd been a hunter his whole life, never feared the woods. When I cleaned out his cabin, I found a map folded inside an old Bible. The map didn't match any park charts I'd seen. It marked a circle deep in Red Hollow, a stretch of land never logged or settled. Beside the mark was one word, Mora. I didn't know what that meant. Maybe a place, maybe a person. I asked a few locals, the old-timers who sat outside the feed store in Miller's Gap, and they went quiet when I mentioned it. One of them spat in the dirt and said, "You stay out of that place, son. Mora's ground ain't for the living." I should have listened. But curiosity is a sickness, and mine runs deep. I set out on a late October morning when mist hugged the hollows and the trees looked like black bones against the pale sky. I told my supervisor I was scouting trail damage after a storm. Truth was, I wanted to see what my father had marked on that map. I had my pack, flashlight, knife, and my father's compass. My radio barely worked that far out. I wasn't worried. By midday, I'd followed the old creek bed into Red Hollow. No signposts, no paths, just the tangle of laurel and oak. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, only the sound of my boots breaking dead twigs. I remember stopping once to drink and realizing I hadn't heard a single insect all morning. That kind of silence is wrong out here. Even dead woods have echoes. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, I made camp beside a fallen sycamore. The air felt heavy, as if it pressed down on my chest. I cooked a little jerky over a small fire, wrote a few notes in my field journal, then lay back in my tent. I listened for coyotes or owls. Nothing. Just stillness that made my own breathing sound too loud. Sometime near midnight, maybe around 2:17 a.m., I heard footsteps. Slow, careful, circling my tent. I froze. The steps weren't animal. They were too measured, too heavy. I gripped my knife, holding my breath. The sound moved once around, then stopped right beside me. I could hear breathing, shallow and ragged, just beyond the thin nylon wall. Then it was gone. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn came, I crawled out and found something hanging from a branch near camp. A dead crow, its wings stretched wide and pinned with sharpened sticks. Its eyes were missing. Beneath it lay a small bundle wrapped in burlap tied with red twine. I didn't touch it. I packed up fast and started walking. For a while, the forest looked almost normal. Then I started noticing signs, trees carved with symbols, circles drawn in ash on stones, and one trunk blackened like it had burned from the inside out. By noon, I came across an open patch of mossy ground where the trail vanished. In the center sat a ring of flat stones. Inside it, a doll stitched from rough fabric, its face painted red with something that looked like dried blood. Long strands of hair were sewn into its scalp. That was when I realized my father's map wasn't about a place he wanted to visit. It was a warning. I turned back toward the ridge, but the path was gone. Every direction looked the same. I kept walking anyway. The forest felt alive, breathing, watching. Sometimes I caught flashes between the trees, like someone moving just out of sight. As the light faded, I saw smoke through the trees. Thinking it might be another hiker, I followed it. But what I found wasn't a campfire. It was a cabin. Or what was left of one, leaning sideways, roof sagging, windows dark. The door hung open, swinging slightly even though the air was still. The smell hit me first, a strange mix of lilacs and something rotten. No lilacs grow in these mountains, not this deep. I stepped inside. Jars lined the shelves, filled with things floating in murky liquid roots, feathers, bones. One held what looked like a hand, small and shriveled. The floor was covered in black dust. When I looked up, I saw prints on the ceiling. Not animal prints, handprints, pressed flat in soot, reaching toward the center of the room. I heard a whisper then, faint and wet, like someone breathing into my ear from behind. The words were too soft to understand. My flashlight flickered, then died. I turned to leave, but there was someone standing in the doorway. She was tall and thin, her skin gray and stretched tight over bone. Her mouth was wrong, too wide, her teeth black and uneven. Her eyes caught the dim light like wet glass. She didn't move, only breathed, sharp and shallow. The smell of lilacs grew stronger. I stumbled back, knocking over a jar that shattered at my feet. Inside it was hair. Human hair. I bolted out the back, running blind through the woods. The forest seemed to close in, branches grabbing at my clothes. I didn't know where I was going, only away. At some point I tripped, hit the ground hard, and everything went black. When I came to, it was morning. My pack was gone. So was my radio, knife, and flashlight. My father's compass lay half buried in mud beside me, the glass cracked. I walked until I found a creek and followed it downstream. My throat burned from thirst. Every shadow looked like it might move. Hours later, I came across another clearing, this one ringed with stones and overgrown with weeds. At first, I thought it was a field. Then I realized the weeds were growing from piles of something dark beneath the soil. I dug one up with my hands. It was hair, clumps of it. That year, nothing grew in that hollow but those weeds, I later learned, and they never wilted. I started laughing then, half crazy from fear and exhaustion, until I saw movement at the far edge of the clearing. A figure stood there. He was shirtless, tall, his skin ashen, like it had been rolled in fireplace soot. His eyes were wide apart, too far, and his mouth stretched longer than it should have. He raised one hand and pointed at me. That was all I remember before I ran. When I stumbled out onto an old dirt road, I collapsed in front of a ranger's truck. The man inside said they'd been searching for a missing teenager, someone who'd gone off trail weeks ago. They found bones out there later, picked clean. Some said it was animals. Others whispered different. I didn't tell them what I saw. I just let them drive me back. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that breathing, smelled lilacs that shouldn't exist. I left my ranger job soon after. Moved to a small town near the coast, far from the mountains. But sometimes late at night when the wind goes still and the air feels thick, I swear I can smell them again. Lilacs. And I know she's close. Locals say Red Hollow was once home to a woman named Mora Wren, a healer accused of witchcraft in the 1800s. They say when they burned her cabin, she cursed the land, every tree, every stone, every breath of wind. They say she marked her ceiling with her own handprints black with soot before the fire took her. And when the smoke cleared, her body was gone. I've spent years trying to forget, but sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Last spring, a hiker disappeared near the same ridge. Search teams found his camp torn apart and a single crow pinned to a branch above it. When they called me to help with the search, I said no. But that night, around 3:21 a.m., I woke to the smell of lilacs drifting through my window. and I realized something. You don't have to go into the hollow for it to find you. Some things just wait, patient as roots, until you open your door, and when you do, they come home. I moved to the mountains to disappear. That's how it started. That's the first mistake. I had always told myself I wanted silence, but the kind that lives in the Blue Ridge Mountains isn't silence, it's waiting. My name is Robert, and a year ago, I walked away from my life in Roanoke, Virginia. I'd been an art teacher, though that barely covered the bills. After my mother passed, the city started feeling wrong. Too crowded, too loud, too alive. The neighbors argued through paper-thin walls, sirens screamed at every hour, and the hallway outside my apartment always smelled like spoiled milk and mold. I told myself I just needed a reset, a little space. So when I found an online post about a ranger's old cabin for sale deep in the Blue Ridge, no address, just coordinates, I thought maybe the universe was finally cutting me a break. One blurry photo showed a wooden cabin half swallowed by trees. The roof sagged, the windows looked like hollow eyes, but I didn't care. It was cheap. Too cheap. The drive out took nearly 8 hours, most of it on roads that looked like veins, thin, twisting, unpaved. I lost cell service halfway through, and the GPS froze. I followed dirt tracks by instinct, the forest pressing tighter with every mile. When I finally saw the cabin, tucked between two ridges, something in my chest loosened. It wasn't much, just logs and rot, but it looked forgotten. And that was exactly what I wanted. The first week, everything felt like peace. The air was thick and cool, smelling of rain-soaked bark. I fixed a few broken panes, cleared out spider webs, and set up my generator. During the day, I hiked through the ridges, sketchbook in hand, and at night, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the forest hum. There were no sirens. No neighbors. Just me and the steady whisper of wind through trees. It took 3 weeks before the forest started paying attention to me. I first noticed the stacked stones on a misty morning just beyond the ridge behind my cabin. 3 rocks, perfectly balanced in a small clearing shaped like a triangle, too neat to be natural. I figured maybe an old ranger or a bored hiker had built them, so I left them alone. But the next day, there were 6, and the next 9, arranged in a half circle pointing straight toward my cabin door. Still, there were no footprints, no disturbed soil, no drag marks from animals. Just stones that hadn't been there the day before. Something about the precision unsettled me, the way they leaned slightly inward, as if listening. I set up a trail camera that night, aimed right at the clearing. When I checked it the next morning, the camera was still there, undisturbed, but the SD card, gone. Not cracked, not chewed, just missing, like someone had plucked it out with careful fingers. That night, I slept with my hatchet beside the bed. Around 2:17 a.m., a sound woke me. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the outer wall. Tap, tap, tap. Not wind, not branches. Someone or something was counting. I froze, listening. The knocks came again, on the opposite wall this time, then near the back door. Always in 3s. I stepped outside with my flashlight, heart hammering. The air was so still it felt heavy. Nothing moved. Not even the insects. The quiet that followed the knocking felt worse than the sound itself. The next morning, I told myself it had to be animals. The generator vibrating, something rational. But that night, the knocks came again, softer now, patient. A few nights later, around 3:42 a.m., I heard my back window creak. I knew it had been locked. I check everything before bed, but now it was wide open. The latch wasn't broken, the screen wasn't cut, it had just been opened. Like something had been let in. I nailed it shut the next day. Then came the doll. It was waiting on my porch one morning, made from twigs tied with twine, packed with dead leaves. A strip of red flannel was wrapped around its middle, the same color as the shirt I'd worn 2 days earlier. It had no face, just a lump of moss where a head should be, and its arms were far too long. It smelled like something wet and sour. I burned it immediately, watching it crackle and twist in the flames. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. That night, the tapping turned to scratching, long, slow drags along the walls, the windows, under the floorboards. It circled the cabin, tracing its edges like it was testing my defenses. I sat up all night with the lights on, hatchet in hand, waiting for something to break through. By the end of the week, the rocks, the cairns had multiplied. They now formed a perfect ring around my cabin. 12 in total, each spaced evenly, angled inward. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. That night, the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, carefully, like someone on the other side was trying to figure out how it worked. It didn't shake or rattle, just rotated back and forth, steady as a heartbeat. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The sound went on for nearly an hour before it stopped. When morning came, the door stood cracked open, the lock unbroken. No footprints, just a thin groove in the dirt leading from my porch into the woods. Something had dragged itself, or been dragged away. I followed it. I know how that sounds, but after weeks of not knowing, I needed to see. About 200 yards in, the trail disappeared beneath a carpet of dead leaves. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall and crooked, hunched like it hadn't yet learned how to stand upright. Its limbs were long, the joints bending backward. Its face was pale and too smooth, with the faint shape of a mouth that seemed to stretch into something resembling a smile. If a smile could be wrong, this was it. My body locked. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I just stared. And then, somehow, I turned and walked back. Didn't run. Didn't look behind me. That night, it didn't knock. It didn't scratch. It just stood outside the window. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the weight of its stare pressing through the glass. The air inside changed heavier, colder. The walls seemed to lean away from me, as if the whole cabin wanted me gone. I burned everything that would burn my clothes, my maps, even my mattress. The fire crackled bright, pushing back the dark for a few hours. But as the flames danced, I saw something in them. For a heartbeat, a woman's face appeared in the firelight. My mother's, smiling, gentle, just like she used to. But then the flames twisted her features, pulling her mouth wide, eyes hollow. That same wrong smile. When I checked the basement later, I found something buried in the dirt. A glass jar, wrapped in black thread filled with ash, feathers, and teeth. My mother used to tell stories about curse jars, buried by witches to trap spirits. She used to say, "Never break one open, Eli. What's sealed stays, sealed for a reason." That night, I believed her. After that, everything in the cabin began to rot faster. Bread molded overnight. The water smelled metallic. Even my reflection in the window seemed thinner, like the woods were draining something out of me. Then came the hen. A black one perched on my porch railing one morning, staring straight at me. It crowed, but not at dawn. It crowed at midnight. Every night after it returned, I stopped sleeping. My skin turned pale. My hands trembled. I could feel myself weakening. By the fourth night, my fingertips had gone gray. The next morning, the hen was gone. But where it had perched, the wood was blackened, as if burned. That evening, far out in the valley, I heard a bell ring. A single, hollow chime that echoed through the hills. It came again the next night, and the one after that. The nearest town was miles away. I finally asked an old man I met at the general store in town if he'd ever heard a bell like that in these parts. He froze mid-step and said, "That bell rings when the mountains claim someone." He wouldn't say more. That night, the bell rang closer. I started seeing figures in the trees. Not always clear, sometimes just shapes between the trunks, but always there when the wind died. Always watching. One evening, I woke to whispers. Dozens of voices murmuring right outside my door. Not words exactly, but a rhythm. A chant. I stepped closer and saw faint shapes through the gaps in the boards. Pale faces, long fingers brushing the wood. The scratching began again, slow and patient. I grabbed my lantern and swung the door open, light flooding the porch. The figures vanished, melting into the forest. Only the cairns remained, each now topped with a single black feather. That was when I realized what they were doing. They weren't warning me. They were marking me. By the next morning, the air smelled of smoke, though nothing burned. The woods were too quiet. Even the birds were gone. I felt eyes everywhere, under my skin, behind me, in the reflection of the glass. That night, the bell rang again, right outside my window. I couldn't take it anymore. I poured salt in a perfect circle around the cabin, like my grandmother used to say. Salt keeps out what don't belong. I stayed awake till dawn, every nerve tight. When the sun rose, I stepped outside. The salt line was broken in one spot. Inside that gap, pressed into the soil, was another twig doll. This one had to face my face. That was when I finally packed what was left. My Jeep, which had refused to start for a week, turned over on the first try. I didn't look back as I drove. Didn't breathe until the trees thinned and the mountains fell behind me. I sold the cabin a month later. Didn't tell the buyer a thing. Now I live above a small hardware store in a quiet town. I keep the porch light on every night, just like everyone else around here does. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, I can still hear that bell ring in the distance. And sometimes, when I light a candle too late, I swear I see her, my mother, smiling from the flame. I was 19 when it happened. And maybe that explains why I said yes when every instinct in my body whispered no. I wasn't stupid, just young, tired, and broke enough to think a week in the woods could fix everything. My name's Noah Green. Back then I was a college sophomore studying environmental science, which sounds cooler than it was. Really, I was just another overworked kid sleeping in a dorm that smelled like burnt ramen and wet socks. When my cousin Marla called me, I thought she was just checking in. Instead, she asked a favor that still keeps me awake sometimes. She and her fiancé, Luke, had just moved into a small cabin deep in the Blue Ridge foothills, somewhere near a forgotten place called Raven Ridge. She said they were heading out for some nature retreat in Nashville. No phones, no Wi-Fi, nothing but goats and yoga mats. They needed someone to watch their house, feed the chickens, keep the generator running, and water the plants. She said it'd be peaceful, a mini vacation. At that time, peace sounded like a miracle. Finals were killing me, my bank account was empty, and I hadn't slept right in weeks. A quiet cabin with no people and free food? I didn't even think twice. I should have. The drive took longer than she said. At first, there were nice winding roads, all golden leaves and sunlight. Then the pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt. After a while, I lost the GPS signal completely. No cell bars. Just trees pressing in so close they almost touched the sides of the car. By the time I found the cabin clearing, I couldn't have retraced my way back if I'd tried. The place looked smaller than I'd imagined. A single-story cabin with chipped green paint, a wraparound porch, and a thin chimney puffing lazy smoke. The trees surrounded it so tightly it looked swallowed, like the forest wanted it back. Marla greeted me with a big smile. Luke barely looked up from the truck he was loading. They showed me around quickly. The generator sat behind a shed, chickens out back, water came from a rain barrel with a pump in the kitchen. "Don't mind the woods," Luke said before they left. "Sometimes you'll hear things." Just the wind. I remember laughing. I wish I hadn't. The first day was calm. I unpacked, read half a novel, ate some eggs, and took a nap on the couch. When I woke up, it was completely dark. Not city dark. This was black as ink, the kind where your eyes strain to make shapes that aren't there. The silence hit me first. No crickets, no frogs, no wind. Just absolute unnatural stillness. I sat up, heart thudding, ears straining for something, anything. For a moment, I thought my hearing had cut out. But then, from far off in the woods, I heard a soft hum. A woman's hum. It rose and fell, slow, like a lullaby through the trees. I froze. The sound lasted maybe 10 seconds, then faded. I told myself it was a trick of my half-asleep brain. I turned on a lamp, read till morning, and didn't think about it again. Until the next day. When I went out to feed the chickens, something on the porch stopped me cold. A dead bird, not a small accident, it was arranged. Its wings were spread evenly, its neck bent backward cleanly, feathers slick and dark as if dipped in mud. It looked placed. I grabbed a shovel, dumped it in the woods, and told myself maybe a raccoon dragged it there. But raccoons don't pose their meals like art. That night, around 2:16 a.m., the motion light flicked on in the backyard. The sudden glow sliced through the dark like lightning. I went to the window and waited for movement. Nothing. Just empty woods and that buzzing fluorescent light. I stayed there for minutes, maybe hours, staring into the stillness. My own reflection stared back, pale and nervous. The next night, same thing, 2:15 a.m. The light clicked on again, but this time, there was something out there. A shape on the deck floor. I squinted, pressed my forehead to the glass, and saw it, a bundle. Small, hand-sized. I opened the door, the night air cold against my skin, and stepped out. The thing was made of sticks and moss, tied with dirty twine, but woven through it were strands of what looked like hair. Human hair, dark, long, knotted. I kicked it into the woods. It rolled out of sight. My pulse didn't slow for a long time. The morning after, the car wouldn't start. The battery was fine, fuel full. But when I turned the key, it groaned and clicked, like something deeper than mechanics was wrong. I tried again and again until the sound turned hollow. Then I walked half a mile down the road until I found one shaky bar of cell signal and texted Marla. "Car's dead." "Weird stuff happening," no reply. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with a kitchen knife in my hand, every curtain drawn. Around 2:20 a.m. I heard it, a heavy thud on the roof. Then slow, dragging footsteps. Wood creaked under the weight. Whoever it was, they weren't sneaking. They wanted me to hear. The steps stopped above the porch. Then came 3 knocks. Calm, even. Not like someone asking for help, like someone waiting for permission to come in. I didn't breathe. Another knock followed, harder this time, shaking the frame. I gripped the knife, staring at the door, counting each second. The knocking stopped, then silence again. That deep, hollow silence that feels alive. I didn't move till the sun came up. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed fast, barely remembered to grab my wallet, and didn't bother with the Jeep. I hiked down the road until I got signal and called my friend Carter, told him to come get me. Didn't matter how long it took. I left the keys under the mat, locked the door, and walked until the cabin vanished behind the trees. A week later, Marla called. She was half laughing. Said they'd found something strange, stick bundles hanging from trees behind the cabin. Dozens. Some had hair tied into them. Some had what looked like clay faces pressed into bark, like masks staring back from the woods. I told her everything. The knocks, the footsteps, the bird, the silence. She didn't laugh again. They moved out before winter. Burned the stick dolls. Sold the place to a couple from Florida who thought the story was just old folklore. But here's the thing. They called me once, months later. The husband sounded shaken, said they'd been hearing whispers in the attic, words they couldn't quite make out. Then one night, the wife swore she heard her own name called from outside while she was half asleep. The locals have a name for that, the sleep caller. They say if you answer, your soul steps out before your body does. They didn't stay after that. No one does. Years passed. I graduated, moved on, tried to forget, but some nights I wake at 2:17 a.m. Sharp. Every time, there's this silence, heavy and wrong, like the mountains are holding their breath. And sometimes, faintly, I hear humming again. A low tune, the same one from the woods. I never get up. I never answer when I hear my name whispered through the dark. Because I know what waits outside. They say in those hills, the witches of Raven Ridge still test the living. They shape dolls from clay and hair, whisper through the cracks of cabins, and wear the faces of those who hear them. I don't know if it's true. But I know this. The night I left that cabin, something followed me. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, my reflection hums first. I still don't understand how I made it out of those woods alive. Sometimes I think maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm still there, and this is just what it feels like to be trapped somewhere between living and dead. My name is Colton Ward, and I've been a travel photographer for the last 5 years. It sounds cooler than it is. Most of the time, I'm chasing shots of abandoned barns, forgotten diners, or faded murals in small towns no one cares about anymore. I sell the best ones to travel blogs or print shops, just enough to keep gas in the tank and food in my cooler. Last October, I got a job offer from a small magazine out of Charlotte. They wanted a photo series on the vanishing Appalachia, a moody, nostalgic look at dying coal towns and old mountain roads. The money wasn't great, but after a messy breakup and 3 months of dry work, I needed it. I packed my camera gear, loaded the car, and headed south from Pittsburgh. Everything was smooth until late that evening, somewhere past Roanoke. My GPS pinged and rerouted itself, claiming it had found a faster way. The screen glowed green, showing a thin gray line twisting through the mountains. It promised I'd save 12 minutes. I didn't think twice. The sun was already sinking, the sky turning that bruised purple that comes before full dark. 12 minutes meant getting to my motel before midnight. I took the turn. The new road was narrower than expected, cracked and broken in places. No lane lines, no street lights, just wet asphalt winding between walls of pine. The signal bars on my phone vanished one by one until there was nothing. Static hissed from the radio. I rolled the window down to get some air. It smelled of rain, moss, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. Then I saw a sign half hidden behind overgrown weeds. Hollow Ridge. Population 7. I almost laughed. 7? I thought it had to be a joke. But as I drove on, I started to feel that slow tightening in my chest, the kind that whispers something's not right. The town was barely a few shacks. A boarded-up general store leaned to one side, its windows clouded with dust. A gas pump stood half buried in the dirt, and across the street was what might have been a schoolhouse long ago, now just a skeleton of vines and splintered wood. No cars. No lights. Not even birds. That was when my tire pressure light blinked on. At first, I told myself it was nothing, maybe just the cold mountain air messing with the sensors. Then I heard the sound. Thump, thump, thump. I sighed, pulled over near the edge of the woods. There wasn't much of a shoulder, just damp leaves and a ditch full of stagnant water. I climbed out with a flashlight, the air sharp and wet. My back tire sagged flat. As I crouched down to pull the spare from the trunk, I felt it. That crawling sense you get when someone's watching you. The forest on both sides of the road seemed too still. I looked up. A man stood among the trees, maybe 30 feet away, tall, thin, shoulders bent slightly forward. His clothes looked wrong for the season, an old brown coat, boots caked in mud. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking. Just standing, staring. "Hey," I called out, my voice shaky. He didn't answer, didn't even twitch. I told myself he was probably a hunter, maybe a farmer, maybe drunk, anything normal. I forced myself to focus on the tire, tightening the bolts with trembling hands. When I looked back up, he was gone. No footsteps, no branches snapping, just gone. I jumped into the car, slammed the door, and started driving again. The spare rattled on the road, but I didn't care. I kept expecting to see a turnoff, a highway sign, something that said I was getting closer to civilization. But the road just twisted deeper and deeper into the trees. After what felt like 20 minutes, I saw movement ahead, something hanging from a low pine branch. I slowed down. My headlights caught it. A deer, upside down. Its belly split open, ribs white in the beam of light. Its eyes were still open too, cloudy and blank. I hit the gas, swerving around it, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd faint. The road curved left, then right, and suddenly, there it was again. The gas station. Same boarded windows. Same broken pump. I hadn't turned around. I'd been driving straight. That's when I saw the lights. Dim, flickering, deep in the woods, lanterns or maybe candles. The glow danced through the fog like small stars. I should have kept going. I know that now. But at that moment, I thought maybe someone lived there. Maybe they could help. So I turned onto a narrow dirt path. The branches closed in immediately, scratching the sides of my car like fingernails. The lights grew brighter as I followed them until they opened into a small clearing. A cabin sat there, old, slanted smoke curling from the chimney, the kind of place that looked frozen in time. I parked, stepped out slowly, and called out, "Hello?" My tire blew. I could use some help. No answer. I climbed the porch and knocked. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the smell of burning wood and herbs. Kerosene lanterns hung on the walls. A pot bubbled softly on a small stove. Animal pelts lined the walls. A rocking chair sat by the hearth. But no one was there. I took one step inside, and the door slammed behind me. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I ran back to it, grabbed the handle. It didn't move, locked solid. That's when the whispering started. Faint at first, like a breeze under the floorboards. Then louder, overlapping voices that seemed to come from all around. Words I couldn't understand hissed through the cracks. The lanterns flickered. The pelts on the walls began to sway, though there was no wind. Something scratched beneath the floor, slow, deliberate, like claws on wood. I backed up, grabbed a fireplace poker. "Who's there?" I shouted. No answer. Then the stove flared, and something rose from behind it. It was tall, too tall for a man, limbs wrong, bending backward at the joints. Skin pale and stretched tight, like parchment pulled over a frame, the head tilted, cracking with each movement. When it looked at me, I saw something like recognition, like it knew me. Its mouth opened, and a sound came out that wasn't human, low, trembling, like wind passing through broken glass. I stumbled backward, clutching the poker, and suddenly the whispers turned into screams. The floor split open. I fell through. I don't remember hitting the ground. I remember darkness, heavy and endless. Then, sunlight. I woke in my car, parked outside a collapsed chapel. Morning light streamed through the windshield. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. Full bars, full battery, gas tank full. But the woods behind me were silent, too silent. I drove until I reached a real town, pulled into a diner, and locked myself in the bathroom. I sat there shaking for 20 minutes. When I checked my GPS history, there was nothing. No record of any detour. No hollow ridge. No road. That was supposed to be the end of it, but it wasn't. Because 3 nights later, I found something on my porch. A dead bird. Laid neatly, wings folded, beak pointing toward the door. The next morning, there were 2. And after every argument with my landlord downstairs, the number changed. 3 after a fight. 1 when things were calm, always fresh, always perfectly arranged. Then I noticed the mirror. It appeared one morning, leaning against a tree across the street, old, cracked at the corner. When I looked into it, I saw myself, and someone standing just behind me in the reflection, but when I turned around, there was nothing. And then the smell came, the same mossy rot from the cabin. That night, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps outside. I peeked through the blinds. A woman stood in the snow barefoot, her hair wild and long, holding a bundle of herbs tied with twine. Her eyes caught the streetlight, not glowing, but wrong somehow, too dark. By morning she was gone, but down by the shed, I found the neighbor's dog, gutted but not eaten. I don't leave my house after sunset anymore. My friends think I'm just depressed, burned out from traveling. Maybe they're right, but some nights, around 3:15 a.m., I hear the same whisper from under the floorboards. The same voice I heard in that cabin. Sometimes it says my name. Sometimes it just laughs. I've stopped taking pictures. Every photo I try to capture now, no matter where I am, shows a shadow behind me. And if you ever find yourself on a road that isn't on your map, one that looks like it's been waiting for you, don't follow it. Because some paths don't take you anywhere, they just take you. I remember the sound before I remember the forest. A soft hum, like air moving through hollow wood, steady and cold. That was the first thing I heard the night everything went wrong. My name's Caleb Hart, and what happened out there near Redfern Hollow in North Carolina still wakes me up some nights, long after I left the mountains behind. I wasn't a park ranger, not really. I was a Forest Service volunteer, the kind they call in during off-seasons to help with cleanup, to mark fallen trees, to make sure no one's camping where they shouldn't. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid for my rent and gave me something to do besides drinking and remembering my uncle, the man who'd loved those woods more than anything. My uncle was Ronald Hart, a career ranger who never married, never left the hills. He lived alone in a small cabin near the edge of Red Fern State Forest, a place older than any of the maps showed. He used to tell me the forest didn't belong to people, that it only tolerated us when we forgot it was watching. When he died of heart failure in his sleep, the family barely noticed, but I drove down to take care of his things. Maybe out of guilt, maybe because I wanted to see what kept him there all his life. The cabin looked just like I remembered it, quiet, neat, filled with the smell of pine oil and old paper. His boots still stood by the door, a jacket hung over the chair, half a cup of cold coffee left on the table, as if he'd stepped out and never come back. I started sorting through the mess, boxes of ranger logs, maps, and notebooks filled with tiny handwriting. That's when I found the ammo box. It was tucked under the workbench in the garage, hidden behind old paint cans and a rusted saw. Inside were bullets, cracked photographs, and a folded sheet of grid-lined paper that had been opened and refolded 100 times. I spread it out on the counter. It was a map, a crude hand-drawn one, but I recognized enough landmarks to know it showed the back section of the forest behind the cabin. Right in the middle, drawn in red ink, were 5 words: "Don't follow the lights." Never after dark. The handwriting was my uncle's. At first I laughed. It sounded like one of those old ranger ghost stories he'd tell when I was a kid, meant to keep people from wandering too far. But the longer I looked at those words, the heavier they felt. I put the paper away that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. A week later, I went looking. The trail behind the cabin had overgrown since my last visit, branches crowding close like they didn't want me there. I took a compass, a GPS tracker, and 2 days of food, thinking I'd camp overnight and see what was so special about that spot. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't think I needed to. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing shaped like a shallow bowl. The trees bent overhead, their branches locking together so tightly that barely any light got through. In the center stood a cairn, a stack of stones waist high, carefully balanced. A rotted plank of wood lay across the top, carved with shaky words, "Stay away." That should have been enough to send me home, but curiosity is a kind of sickness. I set up my tent just off to the side, ate a protein bar, and waited for nightfall. The forest went still around 9:15 p.m., not quiet like a normal forest. Dead quiet, no wind, no crickets, no night birds. It was as if something had pressed its hand over the world and told it to hush. That's when I saw the first light. At first, I thought it was a flashlight, a white orb floating between the trees, maybe 20 feet off. Then another appeared. And another. They moved like they were breathing, slow and silent, drifting around the clearing. I should have left, I knew that. But I couldn't move. They circled the cairn. I sat inside my tent, knife in hand, trying not to breathe. They never came close, just drifted and pulsed, faint as candlelight. Then, one by one, they faded into the dark. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I told myself it was swamp gas, reflections, maybe stress, anything but what it looked like. I packed my gear and should have gone home, but I didn't. I followed the creek deeper into the trees, trying to match the shapes from the map. The woods changed. The air grew colder, heavier. The trees were different, taller, darker, bark rough like dried skin. The ground was littered with small bones arranged in perfect circles, bird skulls and animal spines twisted into patterns I couldn't understand. I took a photo with my phone. Though my hands were shaking so badly, the picture came out blurred. When night came again, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the dark, waiting. At 2:17 a.m., the lights returned. This time there were more of them, dozens, moving faster, darting between trunks like hunting animals. Some hovered inches above the ground, others zipped through the air in silent bursts. My breath caught when I realized they weren't lighting the forest, they were swallowing it. The glow didn't spread. It stayed inside them, as if the darkness itself refused to let it go. Then came the voices. Soft at first, then clear. My name, whispered from nowhere. Then another voice, my uncle's low, trembling. Stay, it said. I froze. Then laughter, childlike and cruel, drifted from behind me. I turned, and the world moved wrong. The shadows bent. The ground pulsed beneath my boots. Something heavy shuffled through the brush. I ran. Branches tore at me, roots caught my feet, but I didn't stop. My flashlight flew from my hand and spun in the dirt. Its beam landed on something pale. A boot, still attached to a leg. The rest of the body was half buried in the moss, skin dry and paper thin, mouth open in a silent scream. The uniform patch on the shoulder was faded, but I recognized it instantly. Ranger service. The ring on the hand was my uncle's. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. The lights stopped moving. Then they gathered, flickering, merging, until they formed something tall and thin, its limbs like branches, its face a smear of light and static. It leaned toward me without sound. I didn't hear it speak, but I felt it inside my head. He stayed. Now you stay. And then I ran. I don't remember getting out of the woods. I woke up the next morning on the old access road, bruised and shaking. A hiker found me hours later. When they checked my GPS tracker, there was a blank spot in the map. No data recorded for the hours I'd been in the hollow. The ranger team that went back found nothing. No cairn, no body, no lights, just trees. I told them I must have been lost, dehydrated. They believed me. But that wasn't the end. A few weeks later, I started hearing it again. The hum. It came from the old radio on my nightstand, one my uncle had given me years ago. Even when it wasn't plugged in, it would crackle at midnight, and underneath the static, I could hear faint words. A woman's voice, soft and broken. Don't follow the lights. Sometimes she said other things. Sometimes she called my name. I thought I was losing my mind, but I couldn't throw the radio away. Then the well appeared in my dreams. Always the same stone walls slick with moss, water black as glass, and faces beneath the surface. Hundreds of them. Some I recognized, most I didn't. But one face always moved. Mine. I went back once more. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove it was real. Maybe the forest wanted me back. When I reached the cabin, the windows were broken, the door half open. The air inside was cold, heavy with the smell of wet earth. On the kitchen table lay my uncle's map. Only this time, there was something new drawn in the center, a spiral of red ink that hadn't been there before. Outside, the forest was waiting. The clearing was deeper now, almost a pit. In the middle stood a stone well, ancient and damp, with strange runes carved into the rim. And there, hanging from a branch above it, was a small charm made from carved bone, tied with thread. The bone charm. It swung slowly in the breeze, clicking softly like teeth. I reached for it before I could stop myself. The moment my fingers touched it, the world shifted. The lights returned, hundreds this time, bursting from the trees, surrounding the hollow like a silent storm. The air shimmered. The ground trembled. Then I saw her. A woman's shape rising from the well, her body made of mist and flickering light. Her eyes were black, bottomless, her mouth barely moving. You broke the circle, she said, her voice a blend of dozens. You let them out. The lights surged brighter, pressing closer. I stumbled back, but they followed, moving like a tide. Behind them, faces swam in the air, faces from the well, faces from the radio, faces of those who'd gone missing. And my uncle's voice, calling from somewhere deep in the noise. Close it, Caleb, before it takes you too. I tried to run, but the ground gave way beneath me. My leg plunged into the water, freezing and solid at once. Hands rose from below, thin and gray, pulling at me, nails scraping my skin. Let go, the woman whispered. So I did. When I opened my eyes, it was dawn. I was lying beside the empty well. The charm was gone. The clearing was silent again. I made it back to my truck and drove until the road turned to highway, until the trees were only shadows in the mirror. I told myself I'd never go back. But the forest doesn't forget. It started small dirt under my nails every morning, the smell of pine even in my apartment miles from any woods. Then came the reflections. In mirrors, in windows, even in the water when I wash my hands. Sometimes they smiled before I did. One night at 3:12 a.m., the radio came to life again, static first. Then my own voice. Don't look into the water. The next day, the Forest Service called. They'd lost another volunteer near Red Fern Hollow. They sent me the incident report, thinking I might know the terrain. There was a photo attached, something the search team had found under a rotted log. A bone charm, carved with the same spiral I'd seen on my uncle's map. They asked if it meant anything. I told them no. That night, I drove to the end of the forest road again, parked where the pavement broke into dirt. Cut the engine. The woods were black and endless. I waited. At first, nothing. Then faintly, from somewhere deep between the trees, I heard a voice. My own, calling. Sometimes I think the lights aren't ghosts at all. Maybe they're pieces of the forest, bits of something ancient that remembers every step we take, every word we speak. Maybe the witches people whispered about weren't women at all, but the woods themselves, hungry and alive, waiting for anyone foolish enough to listen. I still see them sometimes, when the world goes too quiet. A flicker in the corner of my eye, a whisper just behind me. When it happens, I close my eyes and tell myself I'm still in the cabin. Still reading his map, still choosing not to go. And now, but when I open them, it's always the same. The forest, the lights, the hollow, and my reflection in the water smiling back. I thought the mountains only whispered when the wind was right. I was wrong. They whisper when you deserve to hear them. They call me ranger, though out here that mostly means knowing which trees lean, which creeks rise, and which stories nobody wants to say out loud. After my grandmother passed, I took her cabin at the edge of Elder's Hollow, a structure the color of rain-stained bark, held together by old nails and older promises. Folks said the place had a good heart. They didn't say what it had under the porch. The first night, I found a small cross on my windowsill, pinched from river clay, roughly finger-molded with a neat thumbprint pressed into the base. I left it there like a courtesy to the dead. By the time gray came, the cross had softened at the edges, sagging like a candle that wanted to remember being wax. I told myself the air had been wet enough to drink. That was reason enough. Still, I felt odd carrying the cross outside and setting it on the porch rail to dry, as if I'd moved a sleeping child. The day worked on me. I checked trailheads, posted a closure sign for the path behind my place, and listened to the radio talk, back in that scratchy dispatcher voice that always sounds like somebody humming through teeth. The sign was standard issue, warning trail closed. Locals had a name for it anyway. They called it the Whisper Path and said you could walk it once like every other path in the world, but if you walked it twice, the second time it whispered your sins. I didn't believe it, not the words themselves. I believed the certainty in the way they said them. I came home after dusk, when the mountains turn into stacks of blue cards and the creek runs like a whisper with cold breath. The clay cross wasn't on the rail. It sat back on the windowsill, uncracked, unmarked, the very same thumbprint at the base. I checked my pocket for that little sick humor life has. Nothing. I checked the rail. The cross I set there had left a wet smear like mud that didn't want to be mud, and the print on the sill was dry and perfect and waiting. I threw it into the creek. I said it like a benediction inside my head. Clay goes to clay, water to water, leave the dead to hush. I slept anyway, but when I woke at first light, a fresh cross waited on the sill, pinched from clay that smelled like river stones warmed in the hand. The thumbprint was the same. I pressed my own thumb against it. The fit made me want to leave the room. That morning, the milkman from town, one of those old-timers who knows the age of every nail and every board, told me, "Best leave a saucer of milk tonight. The hollow doesn't like to be ignored." "I'm not ignoring anything," I said. "You are," he said kindly. "There's a difference between not believing and not listening." I put a bowl out of respect for the way he'd said it. My grandmother had done the same when I was small. Milk for luck, she'd say, or milk for manners. When I was little, I sneaked a sip and gagged at the skin it formed by dawn. She laughed and tapped my head. Luck is just manners, she told me. Manners never curdle. The bowl curdled by morning. The surface looked stirred, as though a cat had lapped at it, then stopped in the middle of a thought. Near the rim, a pale crescent had thickened into the shape of an eye, and in that smear I thought I could see a pupil the size of a pin. I turned the bowl over and let the soured milk bleed into the ground. The dark patch looked like something's tongue. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the mountain air makes sounds that sound like breathing when it moves under the boards. I told myself a lot of things, all of them easy. They got harder when I found a handprint in the dust outside the bedroom window on the glass. On the outside, 5 long fingers pressed with such care you could count the ridges. I stood on a chair and ran my fingers along the top frame. No smudge, no path down the siding, no scuff where anyone had climbed. Just that hand, like a promise on the wrong side of the world. I cleaned it with vinegar and scolded myself for the childish relief that came when the glass shone. The relief lasted until night fell and the handprint returned, pressed faintly into the glass, as if something warm had set its palm there and cooled. I could have called the sheriff. He's a friend, and he has the kind of worn patience that makes bad news feel manageable. But I'd caught him shaking his head at my closure sign that afternoon, and I didn't want to hear what he'd say about milk bowls and clay trinkets. I'm not afraid of being wrong. I'm afraid of being told I've made this place worse by pretending not to understand it. After the handprint returned a third night, after the clay cross reappeared a third morning, I went into my grandmother's room, which still smelled the way thin quilts smell at the end of winter, clean and threadbare, and somehow waiting. Her books sat on the shelf like narrow gravestones. At the back, where I'd never looked, a small ledger lay turned upside down. The cover bore the faint gouge of a cross drawn by a shaky finger. Inside, her writing: milk for courtesy, clay for binding, breath for a name. Keep her from the path. Keep her from twice. The words made me angry for reasons I couldn't pin. Who was her? Why did her need keeping? I don't like cages. I never have. A long time back, when I worked wildfire down south, we kept a fox in a metal cage while we cut a line around her den. The animal didn't scream, didn't bite. She breathed in this slow, controlled way, like breath could be counted and used up. When we let her out at dusk, she folded into the brush without a sound. I never saw her again, but sometimes when steel grates sing under boots, I think of that quiet breathing. The memory's scratched now, like a nail under paint. I slept badly, if you can call lying still and counting creaks sleep. Around what my grandmother would have called 2:17 a.m., something moved under the porch. Not scuttling, not animal. A long inhale, then a long exhale, matching my own. I put my hand over my mouth. The sound under the boards did the same. Sometimes fear stings, sometimes it clears. That night, it cleared. I got up, took the flashlight, and went outside. The beam slid across the underside of the porch lattice. Joists, the long shadow of the house against the dirt. The dust lay smooth, except where it wasn't. A shape had been dragged back and forth, as if someone had been laying a body down there and straightening its limbs. In the far corner, the dirt rose into a shallow mound topped with a small mess of broken clay. Crosses, melted, misshapen, reformed, broken again. My grandmother's ledger warned, keep her from the path, keep her from twice. I touched the mound. It was warm as an armpit. When I stood up, the light caught the trees at the edge of the yard. Something stood between them, or seemed to. Just a shiver of darker dark, shaped like a woman with her hair hung down. She didn't move. She didn't need to. I went inside and lowered all the blinds and sat at the table. I tried to drink coffee, but coffee felt like too clean a thing for this. I made tea instead, something that could stand there and change if it wanted. The handprint on the window remained patiently outside, ghosted in the pane. In the morning, I met a stranger on the road. He wore a stiff jacket made of work and a cap with no logo, a man from nowhere. He leaned on my mailbox as if it were his. "Cabin's yours?" he asked. "It was my grandmother's." He nodded like we shared a task. "You closed that path. There's folks don't like that. Trails get closed." He regarded the trees with an expression I could not like. "Some paths don't belong to you. Are you lost?" I asked. He smiled without showing teeth. "I'm looking for my sister." He tapped my mailbox. "She's under there." I said words that didn't make sense even to me, and he walked away, as soft as a man could walk on gravel. His boots left no print. Later, I told myself he was a trespasser with tricks and soft-soled shoes. I told myself many things again. At dusk, when the shadows began needing names, I carried a red flare from the truck to the yard and set it upright in the dirt. The flare coughed, then burned steady, washing the porch bones in red. I figured if anything human came to my property that wasn't invited, the red would spook it. I didn't say what the red would do for anything else. The whisper path is older than the town, older than most of the trees, a deer track that became a human track, that became something like a line people stepped over to show they could. When I first came home, I walked it once because I wanted to see if the creek looked different from its curve or if the hemlocks ashed out higher than I remembered. Silence met me, which is a kind of permission. After the stranger, after the third handprint, I walked it again. The path through Laurel is a tunnel a child would draw, leaves scrolled into the shape of quiet. At first, my boots sounded like boots on pine ends. Then a shiver of words gathered the way gnats do, too small to hurt you, too many to stop them. The first whisper said my name in a voice I pretend not to recognize on voicemail. The second whisper said something I had done, which the mountain didn't have the decency to forget. These are not sins anybody else could convict you for. They are the private kind. I had left a man alone one winter night because I wanted to believe his slurred thanks more than I wanted to wake his sister. I had turned a radio down because the fire crackled so pretty and voices burned the edge off it. I had looked at my grandmother's hands, gone thin as twigs, and told her I would be right back when what I meant was I couldn't bear to stay. "Stop," I said aloud, and the path, obedient as a dog that doesn't know any other word, fell quiet. But when I turned back, the way home had narrowed. The laurel leaned. The earth decided a different slope. I walked faster. The whispers came from my left then, from a notch where two boulders leaned into one another like a mouth without teeth. It sounded like paper rubbed against paper. It sounded like someone running their hands across the front of a dress to smooth it right before walking out to the gallows. When I came out into my yard, the red flare had burned down to a nub of red metal, wobbling in its own waxy melt. A second flare lay struck and dead beside it, as if someone had tried to light it and changed their mind. The bowl of milk I'd put out for manners had soured not in hours but in minutes. And there, where the porch steps begin, lay a metal cage that hadn't been there before. It was the size you'd use for a fox or a coon trap door, sprung latch, the simple arithmetic of capture. At first I thought, the stranger again, up to something ugly. Then I saw the latch had been tied off with twine, the color of old teeth, a knot my grandmother would have called a binding knot, the kind you use when a thing wants to open itself. Inside the cage lay a square of clay wiped smooth, and in that clay a handprint small as a girl's, old as the river that made it. 5 fingers, a thumb deeper than the rest. That was the thumbprint I had been seeing all along on the cross. I carried the cage under the porch and set it beside the mound. It felt respectful in a way I couldn't name. The smell under there was clean dirt and iron and something sweet I could not place. Milk turned to breath. The sheriff stopped by close to dark, shoving his light around my yard like a man who suspects he's going to find what he's looking for and wishes he wouldn't. He touched the spent flare with his boot. "You sure you want to do this your way?" he asked. "I'm not doing it anyway," I said. "It's doing me." He followed my eyes to the porch. He's a kind man with a practical mind, and he knew the ledger had something to do with this even before I showed him the page. He read it once, twice, then handed it back like it might break him if he held it a third time. "Your grandmother did what she could," he said. "Those old binds, they were mercy when there wasn't much else to use. "Who is she?" I asked, meaning the one under the porch, the one the path would not let be twice. He studied the trees as if they might be listening for his answer. "Some say she wasn't a witch until we made her one. That night I lit 2 red flares and stuck them in the ground like candles at a roadside cross. The light made the cabin look like a photograph developed wrong." I sat on the steps with the ledger on my knees and read the pages I had avoided. Herbs, small instructions on when to plant by the moons, how to set a bone without making a soul angry. Then a line that drew my breath out of me with its simple weight. If the clay softens, the promise weakens. If the milk sours, she wakes. She was my sister. I felt my grandmother's absence as a blow then, not grief but removal, the way a fence looks different when a gate's gone. I thought, you did this to keep a promise you didn't make and to hide a truth you didn't tell. I whispered the name I'd never heard for the woman under my porch, and the porch breathed it back, careful as a nurse. The stranger returned after midnight. I knew he would before I saw his shape unhook itself from the trees. The red flares threw his features into relief, cheekbones mule stubborn, mouth made for holding words in. He stood just where the light broke and didn't step into it. "You found the knot," he said. "You put the cage there." "I put the choice," he said. "You can put a thing in a cage without the cage ever touching it." "What does she want?" He studied the crisscross light as if it meant something to him. "To be named," he said. "To be listened to. To be put right." "She was burned," I said, because the path had let me have that picture when I walked it twice. The memory had come at me sideways. The crowd, the way heat lifts the skin of a face you love. The sound of my grandmother's voice, too steady. "She was bound," he said. "Burning is noise, binding is quiet. The quiet lasts longer." The red flares hissed, and a moth flung itself at them, as though light were a door you could go through with enough faith. I said the name again, not quite brave, not quite praying. The stranger tipped his head the way men do when they hear the song they'd hoped for at last. "What happens if I break the bind?" I asked. "You don't break it," he said gently. "You finish it." He left the yard without turning his back on the house, the old mountain way of not giving anything your naked spine. When he was gone, I took the ledger and went under the porch. The dirt crumbled cool and fine under my knees. I set the metal cage beside the mound and put the square of clay on my thigh. With my thumb, I pressed a print into it that didn't match the one there, and felt foolish and stubborn and tired of being both. Then, with the side of my hand, I smoothed it out again, and with the carefulness of a prayer I didn't remember learning, I pressed my palm into the clay and lifted it slow so the ridges could drink. "I hear you," I said to the dirt. "I hear you, I hear you." The breathing under the porch matched mine again, but this time I didn't cover my mouth. I let breath be what it is, trade, tide. The handprint on the window didn't appear for the first time in days. The milk soured, but only at the edges, as if it had thought about becoming something else and decided against it. In the late hours, the ones my grandmother had called 3 in the morning, written out long because numbers are too sharp for the dark, I took a shovel and walked behind the house. The red flares had burned to sleepy eyes. The whisper path lay a lighter stripe in the leaves. I followed it to the notch and then beyond, to a small place where the ground held a little heat that didn't come from weather. I dug until the shovel rang a sound like a jar. When I lifted the jar, the clay seals gave with a sigh. Inside lay old hair braided with grass, a bit of linen folded around something small and hard, and the fragment of a cross pinched from clay, with a thumbprint deep as a dimple at the base. I carried the jar home and set it on the table. I didn't know how to finish anything that had been started before I was born. The ledger told me the last bit plain: if you have bound with fear, unbind with respect. If you have sealed with forgetfulness, unseal with a name. If you have caged with iron, open your own hands first. So I opened my hands. I said the name again, the way my grandmother would have said grace before a meal, like every living thing has hungered too long and deserves to be fed. Then I took the little clay cross and pressed it to the new clay square I had made, joining them with the wet breath of my mouth, like boys do when they make a pact out of spit. I placed the cross under the porch on the mound and left the metal cage open with the latch laid down like a tired head. The breathing stopped. It didn't stop because a thing ended. It stopped because something finished being caged by listening to a man who had finally shut up long enough to hear. The ground felt different under my knees. The air seemed to move more evenly through the lattice. I stood, and my back had that ache that comes when you've done the right thing slowly. Morning belongs to birds in Elders Hollow, and they took it as if they'd been waiting for permission. The clay cross on the windowsill did not melt. The bowl of milk turned to skim the way milk does when it minds its business, and the night did nothing to it. The window shone clean, if glass can shine for any reason besides light. I carried the jar to the creek and let the water take what it could and forgive what it couldn't. The sheriff came by after sunup and asked me how the night had gone. I told him I'd listened. He said he'd write that down as all quiet and winked like a man who knows that quiet is a lot of work. Before he left, he looked past my shoulder at the porch and nodded the way a neighbor nods at a fence he helped you fix. That afternoon, the milkman set his usual bottle at my step and added a small folded note, "Manners never curdle." I left a bowl that night anyway, not for fear, not for luck, but for respect. Some things don't need a reason if you have the right word for them. Days lengthened. Leaves did what leaves do. The path grew a little hair of grass, where feet had gone too often. The closure sign weathered. I left it up. Let the path rest, I thought. Let whispers be the business of trees and water and the small animals that use the world as a tunnel. When the stranger came again, it was in daylight, which made him look less like an omen and more like a man who had walked further than was good for him. He stood at the edge of the yard and touched the brim of his cap to the house instead of to me. "You finished it," he said. I listened. "It's the same thing," he said. "If you do it right." He walked off toward the notch. I watched until he turned sideways into the trees and the color took him. I don't know if I'll see him again. Sometimes you don't when you've said what you came to say. There are children in Elders Hollow who leave bowls of milk because their grandparents have told them to, and there are children who leave bowls because the habit sits right in the hand. Now and then a teenager will set a bowl out and mutter some curse word like thanks because you have to be two things at once at that age. I pass the cabins in the truck and watch the bowls glow like little moons. When the wind cuts from the east just so, I still hear something under the porch, but it isn't breathing. It's the sound of dry dirt falling from a hand opened at last. I sit on the steps when that happens and say a name I don't write down, and the house leans a little as if settling. I keep the ledger on the table and look at it when I need reminding that the simplest instructions are deadly hard. Be respectful, be clear, don't lie to yourself, and then pretend the mountain did it. Folks still talk about the whisper path. They still warn hikers away. Every now and then, a fool will walk it twice and come back with a face that has learned something it doesn't want to say out loud. When they stop by my place in the polite panic people do when they've met themselves and survived, I pour coffee and keep my voice low. I tell them there are three kinds of binds: the ones others put on you, the ones you put on others, and the ones you put on yourself. If they ask what to do about the last kind, I shrug and suggest they start with a name and a bowl of milk. It's not magic. It's manners. Some nights I wake at 2 a.m, written out long like a small prayer, and stand at the window. The glass shows me a man who looks like kin to the old ones and not enough like himself. I think about how I pretended not to understand this place and how it forgave me anyway by showing me what I already knew. The handprint and the dust hasn't returned, but I still wipe the sill with a damp cloth now and then, the way you do when a guest has left and you want the room to be ready, just in case. The clay cross stays solid. I don't test it. I don't throw it into the creek. If I pick it up, it's to feel the weight of something small that was made with care and pressed with a thumb that loved someone enough to try to hold her in a world that wouldn't. On the base, in the top crescent of the old thumbprint, my own print now crosses it. A quiet, clumsy X. 2 marks. 2 people. A finish instead of a bind. When the mountain breathes now, it keeps its breath. The whispers are there if I want them, but I don't chase them. I tend the trails I can tend, and I let the others run their ancient arithmetic without my numbers in them. Every so often, the sheriff will park at the end of the drive, and we'll sit with the engine ticking cool and talk about fishing in a way that means we're talking about death without scaring it into the yard. If you pass through Elders Hollow and see a red flare burning on a stump at dusk, don't be nervous. It isn't a warning. It's a candle for the living, and sometimes for the complicated dead. It means somebody is listening. It means somebody remembered to open their hands. And if you find a bowl of milk on a porch and you're thirsty, leave it be. Not because something terrible will happen if you drink it, but because something good will if you don't. I used to think the mountains only whispered when the wind was right. Now I know they whisper when you listen right back.